in the mountains about 6,300 feet above sea level. Life magazine reported on the story after an expedition from the United States went to the site in 1960. Blowing holes in the strange formation, the members of the team came away with the conclusion that there was nothing there of any archaeological interest. Ron Wyatt, like many others, read the story, but he was of the opinion that the site needed further exploration. There had been many claims of seeing Noah's Ark on the volcanic Mount Ararat, but Ron knew that it was a stratovolcano, and he believed that nothing would have been able to survive there. He noted the biblical account of the location of the ark. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Urartu, the biblical Ararat, was a large region in eastern Turkey. This location was certainly feasible. But the factor that captured his interest the most was the length given in the Life magazine story, 500 feet. Most people were looking for a 437-foot Noah's Ark based on the Hebrew cubit, but Ron again went to the Bible to learn more. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Moses was the author of the Genesis account of the flood. He would have known the cubit of the Egyptians. The Hebrew cubit didn't come into existence until there was a Hebrew nation after Moses' death. The Encyclopedia Britannica stated, "The Egyptian cubit is generally recognized as having been the most ubiquitous or universal standard of linear measurement in the very ancient world. The royal cubit equals 20.62 inches. This would mean Noah's Ark was much longer than 437 feet. 17 years after the Life magazine article, Ron finally made the journey to Turkey. When he saw the boat-shaped object, he saw that it looked just like it did in 1960, and he knew he would need permission to excavate in order to learn anything about what was beneath the surface. So he returned home and enlisted a number of friends to help him pray for an earthquake to reveal more. In late 1978, he learned of an earthquake in eastern Turkey and returned in August of 1979. When he arrived, he was overwhelmed by what he saw. The earthquake had dropped the soil around the object, and a large crack extended the entire length. He could see what looked to him like the remains of decayed rib timbers along the now exposed sides. Also, he was able to measure the depth of the debris and measure the length. It was 515 feet, or exactly 300 Royal Egyptian cubits. He was now convinced. He carefully combed the surface, looking for evidence that it was a shipwreck. He saw what he believed were petrified structures of an ancient ship whose deck had collapsed. He saw what looked like deck joists and deck support timbers. Of particular interest was the fact that the ship appeared to be impaled on a large outcropping of limestone. He concluded that this indicated that the ship had slid into the rock from another location. Before he made his first trip to Turkey, he had done an experiment in a nearby lake, building mountain configurations out of rocks and floating a boat model by them to see the reaction of the boat. He noted that a crescent shape caused the water to pull the boat into the crescent, where the boat remained and gently floated. The present location did not fit with the results of that experiment, so Ron decided to examine the area above the boat shape. The site was in a moving mud flow, so he followed the mud flow up the mountainside. About 1.5 miles up, he found a crescent shape of mountains. He saw that the mud flow began up here. When he arrived near the top of the ridge, he found an ancient stele, like an ancient billboard, which depicted the boat shape, the familiar mountain ridge, several birds, and 8 faces within the boat shape. Clearly, this was a reference to the ship of Noah and its 8 survivors. He noticed a taller mountain peak on the stele that was no longer visible from that location. He concluded that it was a small volcano that had erupted long after Noah's Ark had landed, and that it had carried the ship down the mountainside about a mile, where it was impaled on the limestone outcropping, then covered in lava. The lava then encased the ship like a time capsule. The volcano then collapsed after expending its lava and was no longer visible. He then theorized that as the lava began to decay, water seeped in and allowed the remains to be petrified or fossilized by the process called mineral replacement. Molecule by molecule would be washed away from the remains and replaced by molecules from the objects and substances above it. As he examined the area within the crescent shape, he found a large section, 120 by 40 feet, approximately, of what appeared to be fossilized wood in the ground. He believed this to be the bottom of the ship, the original landing site. His conclusion was that when the floodwaters subsided, the ark sank into the muddy earth. This held the ship upright. Then God sent the wind to dry the face of the earth. The portion of the ship that sank into the mud was now firmly embedded in the ground. Many years later, when the lava carried the ship down the mountain, the main body of the ship was ripped loose. Only this section remained in their original location. Around this area that Ron believed to be embedded petrified wood, he found specimens of rock which looked very unique to him. He took several samples, along with several specimens from the boat shape below. Back home, he sent them for analysis. The results showed organic carbon, which indicated that the samples were consistent with decayed and fossilized wood. They also contained metals such as iron and aluminum. The analysis of the strange-looking rock Ron had found about 1.5 miles above the site by the bottom of the ship was clearly the most exciting. His initial analysis had shown it to be metals and not rock. In 1984, Ron met and became friends with Colonel Jim Irwin, the former astronaut. Colonel Irwin was searching for Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, but he was very gracious and was interested in seeing the boat-shaped site. Ron had brought a metal detector to the site to see if there was a pattern of metal readings. In the presence of Colonel Irwin and others on his team, Ron employed the detectors. He found distinct metal lines down the entire length of the object, while no metal readings were obtained just outside of it. Ron asked Colonel Irwin, who had impressive scientific community connections, if he could have the strange specimen tested. Colonel Irwin sent the specimen to Los Alamos National Labs, where geophysicist John Baumgartner performed the analysis. The results of that analysis captured Dr. Baumgartner's interest. The specimen contained manganese, also titanium and aluminum, among others, and these were not in the form found in nature. Due to the sophistication of the metals, he questioned whether a missile had crashed on the mountainside and Ron had found the remains. The exciting evidences of the metal lines and the analysis of the specimens brought 2 new researchers into the work. Dr. Baumgartner and David Fassel, the marine salvage expert who knew all about ships and their construction. They both joined the team.
Oh, look at that. Oh, well, wait a minute. Let me get a close-up of that. Kind of,
You want my hand in there for?
Yeah, just to point at those little flakes of iron that are coming out, like right there. There and there.
Huh.
That's a strong reading. Well,
I'd save those frames right there.
Okay. Keep walking. Do you want a measuring tape to measure these things, how far apart they are?
John, as a scientist, might I take the liberty here to ask you, do you really honestly believe that you have been on the remains of Noah's Ark?
I have no doubt in my mind. This has to be a man-made structure. It's full of metal. The metal has a regular pattern to it, and the size of the thing and the shape of the thing is such that it's almost certainly a large boat.
Dr. Baumgartner and Ron scanned the entire site with 3 different types of metal detectors. Placing rocks at each metal reading, they then attached tapes to show the lines. This exciting evidence also attracted the interest of ABC's 2020.
The boat-shaped site was first found and photographed by a Turkish army captain back in 1959. It was quickly explored and dismissed as a freak of nature. But Wyatt, an amateur archaeologist, rekindled interest in it a few years ago. He brought in Dave Fasold, a marine salvage expert, to assess it. The Doomsday Mountain team brought in some high technology to explore the oldest legend of man.
There's one.
They began scanning their site with a molecular frequency generator. It's a device used by surgeons to pinpoint cancer tumors, and it's been used by Fasold to locate underwater treasure. This time, the molecular frequency generator began to pick up a unique pattern of iron lines beneath the earth.
Okay, bring that one up.
They began placing ribbons along those lines. The finished shape, outlined by the ribbons, was that of a huge ship, the approximate length and width of Noah's Ark, as described in the Bible. The fascinating field of ribbons soon attracted higher academic interest.
That looks like iron. Okay.
Dr. John Baumgartner, a physicist with Los Alamos Laboratories, sent samples back to the lab for analysis and confirmed that the metal they were tracing with the ribbons was indeed iron. With the width and the length known, the only remaining question was depth. By locating the depth of the hull, they could determine if the boat-shaped object had the cargo capacity described in the biblical ark. To resolve this final issue, Wyatt and Fasold brought geologist Tom Finner to Turkey with his company's heavy-duty subsurface radar equipment. Gear like this located the black box cockpit recorder on the floor of the frozen Potomac River after the Air Florida crash. It was here, several miles short of the boat-shaped site, that a waiting game began for Finner and the others. The party needed a final go-ahead from the Turkish government to complete their probe of Doomsday Mountain. The restrictions of martial law left the American explorers isolated from the outside world. Not even a telephone.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to hang in like smell on a skunk till there's nothing left to get this done.
Hang in like the smell on a skunk. The Turkish government stopped the exploration. What now?
Since we were there, Barbara, things have cooled down, and they've sent their own team of scientists in to take a look at this site. It's a very fascinating location.
While Turkish scientists and archaeologists did their own research, Ron and his associates continued their work. The next step was subsurface interface radar.
There's the longitudinal bulkhead. You ought to see them popping out, Ron.
Yeah, there they are.
Here, there's another one. There's the keel line right there.
Yeah.
Oh, Ron, the lines are there! The lines are there!
Okay, we're going to walk over.
Yeah, Yeah.
Take a look.
Leave it running so everybody knows that we're not cheating here, right?
You got it, Toby.
Okay. Now, this is the west bulkhead. Okay, can you look through there and...
All right.
This is the west bulkhead.
All right.
That was over there. And he walked easterly. Here we start getting the longitudinal bulkheads. Here, 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 here.
Okay.
You see there how it shows up?
Right.
The initial scans were very impressive, showing internal structure consistent with bulkheads and rooms. But to be sure they were interpreting the data correctly, Ron took the scan printouts to Geophysical Survey Systems, the developer and manufacturer of the radar.
This data does not represent natural geology. It's a man-made structure. These reflections are occurring very periodic, too periodic to be random natural type interface.
There was no longer any doubt that this was the remains of something man-made. In late 1986, the Turks announced their decision. The ceremony was set for June 1987. During that ceremony, the governor asked Ron to demonstrate the radar on site for the journalists and military officials. When Ron showed them a readout that he said looked like an intact timber, the governor then instructed a soldier to dig right there. What emerged was this petrified section of fossilized hand-wrought timber. Sectioning showed it to be laminated wood, 5 layers of timber glued together with pitch, clearly visible oozing from the end. This fossilized specimen shows that rivets were used in its construction. Their analysis showed that they contained iron, titanium, and aluminum, among other things, very sophisticated alloys that would be resistant to water. Specimens falling out from the lower end of the ship, identified as slag by an expert in metallurgy, indicated to Ron that Noah filled the hull with slag material from his metal production of the fittings used to build the Ark. More complete radar scans revealed a ship, although damaged and collapsed in places, of very intelligent, modern design with a ramp system at the door which led to each level. In 1990, Ron performed what he called a mini excavation, where he took shovels and bent the blades into a giant razor. He and his associates then shaved off a very thin layer from one section, smoothing it to show the color difference between the structure members and the matrix. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world, and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be.
and the rocks rent.
But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came there out blood and water. And there are three that bear witness in earth, the Spirit, and the water, and the blood, and these three agree in one. If we receive the witness of men, the witness of God is greater. For this is the witness of God, which he hath testified of his Son.
So anyway, I was walking along the cliff face behind this bus station back in this area. I was walking through there. My left hand went out without my brain doing it, and my mouth said, "That's Jeremiah's grotto, and the Ark of the Covenant's in there." Well, I was dumbfounded. This sort of thing doesn't happen to me. In fact, I resist that sort of thing because people that I consider wackos say they have those kinds of experiences. And I still think that most of them that say they have these experiences are wackos. But sometimes, in other words, I don't feel comfortable with that kind of experience. But our tickets were due the next morning, so we flew home. I told the man, he said, "That's wonderful." He says, "We'll let you dig there. We'll give you all the help you need, a place to stay, provide you food, do your laundry." And this is Israeli. They don't do that. We went home, and I had no idea why the Ark of the Covenant had been there. I never even thought about it. My cup was running over already with things that God had shown me. And so, I was not looking for anything else. So I went home, prayed, and asked the Lord to help me understand why the Ark of the Covenant might possibly be in that place. I was impressed to read the history of the conquest of Jerusalem, and in this 2 Kings chapter 25, it says that Nebuchadnezzar built forts against the city round about. That, in modern language, is a siege wall. Now, this meant that nobody could take anything out of the city or bring anything in the city. So the Ark of the Covenant had to be hidden in the city, under the city, or inside the siege wall. All right? Well, we don't know for sure where the Babylonian siege wall was located, but we know where Titus's siege wall was located. All right? Catapults had the same range back in Nebuchadnezzar's time as they did in Titus's time. And they always built these siege walls out of range of the catapults that were defending the city. So we know where it had to have been. And from that siege wall, people could not observe, watchmen walking the wall, the siege wall, couldn't observe somebody bringing something out into that cliff over there. So I thought, okay, that makes it reasonable. We got ready, came back and started digging. January 1979. In January 6, 1982, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I found the Ark of the Covenant. Right? You would not believe the amount of stone and dirt and everything we had seen. The little Arab guy that was letting us eat at his restaurant, he was a full-grown man, but he's about that tall and small, petite. So as we went through this cave system, he would crawl into the chambers, and I'd give him a light, and he'd shine it around, and I'd peek through to see if it looked like anything in there. So we did this over and over, and we came to this one hole after you wouldn't believe where all we had gone in that cave. And at this point in time, we had gone about 45 feet down and then back up. And here this hole was in the wall, about that big around, and there was a stalactite hanging right down the middle of it. It's the only stalactite I had seen in the cave that wasn't just little ones. This was a big one, and I have in my collection of things. So I broke it off, made the hole big enough for him to get in, and he was crawling in there, and I started to hand him the light so he could do what we had been doing, several days. He came tearing out of there. His eyes were big as human eyes can get. And he said, "What's in there? What's in there? I'm not going back in there." And I said, "Well, what did you see?" He said, "I didn't see anything." And I thought, well, okay. Now, he'd been in tighter places than that and had not responded that way. So I got this little beam of light, in a very dark place here. And I thought, that is divine terror. That's supernatural terror. So I figured that is either where the Ark of the Covenant is, or it's the way to get to it, one or the other. And God doesn't want this fella to know where it is. So anyway, he said, he just said, I must get out here, so I'll be there. So I made the hole big enough for me to get in. I got in there, and folks, it was full of rocks, bigger than these here, up to within 18 inches or so of the ceiling. If this young man hadn't been terrorized and come scooting out of there like he did, I would not have gone in that place. But through these rocks, we've been thousands of them for 3 years. So anyway, I crawled in there with the flashlight, and I crawled around on top of the rocks, and I shined the light down between the cracks in the rock, and there a flat gold thing reflected back at me. So I moved over and shined down to another. There was 2 reflections, one here, one there, and one over here. So I knew it was a flat gold top. And I thought, the Ark of the Covenant. I forgot about the cherubims, sitting on top. They'd have been poking up through the top of the mercy seat. But anyway, I started moving these rocks, and I stuck them everywhere I could. By the time I got down to that gold surface, I had them behind my shoulders, leaning back against them, and it was the table of showbread. Well, hey, that's not a bad thing, huh? But anyway, I was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And it was only then that I took time to carefully examine the rest of the chamber. See, I had just crawled in, took a quick look, and started checking down under the rocks. So as I moved the flashlight along the wall, I saw a stone box sitting against the wall about this low, this much space between it and the ceiling. The lid was broke, slid around, and right above it was a crack with dark brown-looking material at the bottom on the bottom of this crack, and I was able to see the top of the lid of the box. On both sides of the broken pieces was more of this brown stuff. All of a sudden, I realized I was sitting in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and that Christ's blood had poured out. I had never heard anybody preach anything about that sort of possibility. That's too much for me. When I regained consciousness and looked at my watch again, 45 minutes had passed from the time I crawled in the chamber. Because I figured I'd find the Ark of the Covenant in there, I wanted to know what time it was. So anyway, it was 2 o'clock when I entered the chamber. And after I regained consciousness, it was 2:45. I couldn't see down in there.
If you were to visit the Garden Tomb today in Israel, you would be able to see the tomb that Jesus Christ rose from. You can see the skull, where the Bible describes it as Skull Hill, Golgotha. And you can also see the place where they covered up Ron Wyatt's excavation, the place where Jesus Christ was crucified. And it's pretty hidden, so you have to know where it is. This family here, who is visiting the Garden Tomb, fortunately for them, the gardener knew where Ron Wyatt's excavation was. Then they met a guy who said some pretty interesting things, who's putting the puzzle pieces together and connecting the dots. So have a listen to what he has to say as well.
As in heaven, so on earth, this was God's desire, because he knew that we were slaves to sin. We were slaves to the slave owner at the time, and the slave owner had been, ownership had been given over to the devil. Well, when he actually was crucified, it was the innocent lamb, the God that takes away the sin of the world. Well, it says that he took his blood into the heavenly holy of holies, but also as in earth, because it says there's three witnesses in the earth: the blood, the water, and the spirit. So the blood and the water came out of the side of Jesus. At the time of the crucifixion, there was a great earthquake, and the rocks were rent. And of course, you can see, if you go back there, you can see where they filled it in. But I can't, I saw it before it got filled in. And they literally filled in the cracks that came down through here.
So you yourself saw?
I saw it before they filled it in, and you can see it on the other side where they did fill it in. But the crack comes down here, and the crack came down, and it was right at the base of the cross. And so then, after Jesus had died, Spirit, out came blood and water, poured down, and it dropped onto the mercy seat.
Right. Exactly. So then, you've been to Zedekiah's tunnel or caves or whatever, and in there and everything?
I know essentially
where it is,
how to get in.
So that's two things we wanted to do today was come here and see this, and go to his tunnel and kind of just see. We don't want to obviously try to find it, but
Right.
because you actually saw Ron Wyatt and met him.
Yeah.
What was your name?
Robert.
Brian?
I mean, it was 30 years ago.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And so I was just sitting across the table. I was a proud young kid, and I talked to him for a while, and then I realized how stupid I am, because when you're in the presence of somebody who's humble, and then your pride gets really shown for what it is, and so
Yeah.
you know, that was pretty.
So this, wow. So it's underneath us.
This is the Ark of the Covenant, and why people don't understand it. They don't. I guess they don't understand the covenant.
Right.
They don't understand the blood. They
Right.
don't understand what God was doing.
Right.
The reason we have the freedom and the spirit that we have is because the blood's down
On the ark, it was supposed to anoint the ark.
water
I know.
there, and that's what made it so that we can have the spirit, because it's holy. I heard that they sent 6 people in to try to pull that out of there.
Yeah, and they died.
Right. Do you know why?
They weren't allowed to be in there yet. Papa said no.
But do you know why?
Well, then, is there more?
Yeah, they would profane the ark. Yeah. Well, what's profaning the ark? Well, what's on the ark? What's on there? The blood is.
Blood.
What's the blood doing? It's speaking a better thing than that of Abel. And the thing is, it's the throne of God in the earth, as in heaven, so on earth. We got something rocking. I mean, I say rocking, but we got something going on here. This is, to understand. That won't be messed with until that which restrains him is taken away.
Exactly.
And when that happens, we're going to have hell revealed on this earth. And that's the great tribulation.
An important witness that is going to be an important witness.
Right.
That blood on the ark, so that has to be preserved until the time's right.
Must be.
Yeah, and then when the abomination of desolation is when the dude, the man of sin, sits on the throne and proclaims himself God.
Right.
Elohim.
So whatever he does to profane, because that's what the devil's always trying to get into the midst of something to profane it.
I'm so thankful to run into you guys.
Yeah.
This have confirmation from someone else. We try to tell our friends this, and they just don't. They just don't want to believe it because it's too crazy.
So if you're wondering why they're so interested in Zedekiah's cave, it's because Ron Wyatt found the entrance. There's an actual tunnel that'll take you right to the Ark of the Covenant chamber, and it's sealed off right now because Israel sealed it off.
And then you can also see a wall that Ron Wyatt is standing in here, and let's take a closer look at this wall.
So I'm going to read from a book that was recently published with all of Ron Wyatt's discoveries, and apparently on this gold detector test that they did at the Garden Tomb. In 2016, 36 tests were done using a directional metal detector in order to confirm the Ark of the Covenant. Prior to conducting these tests, the detector was tested to see if it could detect a gold coin about 15 feet away, and next to try and detect an 8-inch 18-karat gold chain about 10 feet away. In both cases, the detector pointed to these objects without failure. Over the course of several days, the detector was used in front of the cutouts in the rock of the crucifixion site of Christ that we had mentioned earlier. Below this area should be the Ark of the Covenant. But could a detector pick up a reading for gold and the Ark at a depth of 50 feet? Tests were done in front of the rock escarpment about 20 feet away, then at 45-degree angles, then over to each side. In every test result, the detector pointed to the correct location of the Ark. After receiving these readings, the detector was positioned over the spot that should be the center of where the detector had been pointing. When placed over this spot, the detector began to spin, meaning the gold is directly below. This was still another confirmation. When moved away from this spot several feet, it would point back to where the arc should be. It repeated this time after time without failure. The idea then came that the detector should get a real workout. How about trying it from 65 and 100 feet, respectively, from 3 different directions? Could the detector still find the arc? First, it was positioned at the overlook for Skull Hill, that is a raised platform and about 100 feet from where the arc should be. Amazingly, it once again pointed to the arc. Next, it was positioned 65 feet directly out from the rock face, and once again it pointed to the arc. Finally, it was positioned 100 feet toward the entrance to the Garden Tomb grounds, and once again it pointed to the arc. In order to get these long-distance test results, there would have to be a large amount of gold in that location. All in all, there were 36 test results. Every test that was done with the detector confirmed there was gold in the direction of the arc as reported by the late Ron Wyatt. There were no tests that contradicted this site. End quote. So you can see it's starting to spin because the guy is going over that spot again, and whenever this guy goes over that spot, it spins, and whenever he's not at that spot, it points back to that spot. Now, there's more. I'm going to read a personal testimony by a guy named Ian Fain.